We're going to put together several things, readings from the Bible, from the Bhagavad Gita, and a science thing that pulls a bunch of stuff together. And then I'm going to show you this lovely drawing here, and so it all makes sense. Let's start with this Bible reading, one of my favorites, in which Jesus multiple times talks about how there's mysteries and hidden things going on, right, that most people don't know about. And so we're going to be discussing some of those mysteries today. Matthew 13:10, the disciples came to Jesus and asked him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" And Jesus answered them, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given." Okay, that's pretty important, because he's differentiating between some people getting the secrets of the kingdom of heaven and others not getting it. Later on in Matthew it says, he opens his mouth in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundation of the world. So stuff is being hidden and there are secrets, right? That's an important thing. So from the Bhagavad Gita, which I just have some excerpts in the book, New Eyes, some excerpts. I'm going to read some of the verses, some of the teachings of Krishna from the Gita, in which Krishna says, deluded by individuality, the self thinks, I am the actor. Deluded by individuality. What does it mean to be deluded? First of all, deluded. Go ahead.
You believe you're your body. You believe your thoughts.
Right. That's the full delusion. Okay. In general, a delusion is when you got something wrong and you're confused by it, right?
Yeah.
Krishna says when you're deluded by individuality,
You're separate.
we think we're separate. Right? We think we're special people or not special people, when we think we're doing things independent of others. And Krishna calls that a delusion. And when you are deluded by individuality, he says, you think, I am the actor. Well, what does that mean? We think we're doing things, right? Our behaviors. I'm acting. I'm doing things. Look at me waving at you, okay? Now, Krishna calls that a delusion. And it's a delusion because I think of myself as separate from you. Seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, walking, sleeping, breathing. The disciplined man who knows reality should think, I do nothing at all. Now, listen to that. Seeing and hearing and touching and smelling and eating and walking, all the stuff we do every day, right? The disciplined man who knows reality. We're going to talk about science today, some of the aspects of reality that are hidden that most people don't know. The disciplined man thinks, I do nothing at all. And yet, we think we're doing stuff all day long. And Krishna is saying, nope, when you know what's going on, you're doing nothing. That's pretty important. You should elevate yourself by the self and not degrade yourself. For the self is its own friend and its own worst foe. For a man without self-mastery, the self is like an enemy at war. Lots of uses of the word self there, okay? That's because there's multiple selves and multiple ways to interpret that. When most people think of self, what do they think of? The physical self, right? I am Steve, white American male, live in Pittsburgh, makes me a Steeler fan. I have 3 children. Self, all of it illusion, all right? None of it true, not in the big picture. And that's back to I am an actor, thinking I'm doing all these things as this physical self. Well, I don't need to beat myself up for that, because that's pretty much everybody falls into that trap, right? We all do. That's called falling asleep. I don't need to degrade myself, but I do have to recognize if I don't have self-mastery, I'm going to be at war. With whom? Myself. This is Krishna's teaching throughout the Gita. All of us are at war with ourselves. This is what jihad really means. The war inside one's own mind, between the two selves, the false self and the true self. Right? The physical self and the eternal soul. That's what's really going on. And you can use that one self to elevate the other self. In Matthew, it says that God uses the world as his footstool. The Course in Miracles says, use the physical world to teach the spiritual world, right? Well, use this false physical self to elevate the spiritual self. We are specifically here to do things we're not really doing, to experience things, to elevate the spiritual self. If you don't do that, you're going to feel like you're at war, but the war is inside yourself. And then Krishna says, Just as a flaming fire reduces wood to ashes, visualize that, a fire taking a piece of wood and reducing it to ashes, so does the fire of knowledge reduce all actions to ashes. Ashes. What's that mean? Actions to nothingness, okay? All these behaviors that human beings are obsessed with, especially in religion, we're obsessed with behaviors, mostly other people's behaviors. And then when we've done something wrong with other people, there's either a judgment quality or a guilt quality. And Krishna says, when you've got the knowledge, again, of how the world is actually operating, all actions are reduced to ashes. Also in the Gita, he says something like, knowledge is 1,000 times more powerful and more important than action. Which is to say, which comes first? The knowledge and the wisdom, much more important. So now let me share with you a recent article that just came out. Science Alert. It's an article in which some people wrote in a research paper, or in the Frontiers of Psychology, a research paper, saying that consciousness does not seem to drive the human mind. Everyone knows what it feels like to have consciousness. It's self-evident. It's a self-evident sense of personal awareness. All of us are sitting here aware we're in a room, right? You're aware, you're all awake, you're all listening to me. That's a sense of awareness. All of us have that. And this gives us a feeling of ownership and control over thoughts, emotions, and experiences that we have every day. Most experts think that consciousness can be divided into two parts. The experience of consciousness, or your personal awareness, which again, we all have right now, and the contents of consciousness, which includes things like thoughts, beliefs, sensations, perceptions, intentions, memories, and emotions. Right? Two parts to consciousness. One is the awareness, and another is all that non-physical stuff, including thoughts and emotions, that we think of ourselves as, or that we think that's us. It's easy to assume that these contents of consciousness are somehow chosen, caused, or controlled by our personal awareness. But in this new research paper, we argue that that's a mistake. We suggest that our personal awareness does not create, cause, or choose beliefs, feelings, or perceptions. Instead, the contents of consciousness are generated behind the scenes, it puts that in quotes, behind the scenes, by fast, efficient, non-conscious systems in our brains. So you have two forms of consciousness. One is the awareness, and another is all this data, including the beliefs and the thoughts and the emotions. And one of them, it says, sits passively in the passenger seat while the other processes occur, which is the thoughts and the beliefs and the feelings, which, by the way, drives your behaviors. All those things are somehow behind the scenes. Now, I would suggest that's exactly how computers work, right? Computers sitting there with a bunch of data on it. This is suggesting, basics, not suggesting, it's, I think, saying it directly, what I just read about Krishna and what science has long since suggested in terms of the way the world works. All information is already here, and your brain comes preloaded with it. You're not your thoughts, as Buddha would teach. You're not your thoughts, because your thoughts are rising from the point of view that you're having, from your perspective, from the observer that's sitting back just watching things. That's what you are. You're this soul. You're this conscious experience observing your brain and observing your thoughts and observing behaviors. Now, when you do that, you have a shift in experience and a shift in awareness. It's this little drawing that I have here. Most people think they're this body of some sort, okay? There's a brain, that's what that is, that's a brain. And the thoughts that are inside the brain, and they think they're body, and we define ourselves as male and female, and white or black, or tall or short, or gay or straight, or whatever, go on with that. And that's how we label ourselves. And those are thoughts that we have. And that's a physical experience of what's ultimately the false self. It's not what you are. That's the part that's preloaded. That's the part that you don't control. That's the costume. That's the experience you're having. You, for lack of a better way to draw this, are that little blue spot. You could call it the point of awareness like they do in Kabbalah. You could call it Christ. You could call it Buddha, Muhammad if you want, whatever. Whatever the Lord is to you. You are this little seed inside there that's having an experience. This big blue thing I've got around there is like the aura of consciousness. I don't know how to draw it otherwise. And what you are is observing all of this. Now, all the physical stuff, including your thoughts and your emotions, you have the opportunity to observe. Now, when you do that, Buddha would call that detachment. When you observe it, Does it change it somehow? As opposed to when you cling to it, and when you define yourself by it. If you are your thoughts, I've worked in mental health for 15 years. When I deal with people who have racing thoughts, what diagnosis do they usually end up with? When they can't control their thoughts. Yeah, that works. Anxiety, any type of these, some of the diagnoses that are upper, if you will. A lot of intensity, a lot of anxiety. And they can't control their thoughts. And when they define themselves, I have ADHD, I have anxiety. Does that make it better? No, it actually creates some more dysfunction. What about depression? I am depressed, right? That's a label that we give ourselves. Then what happens next? We start to develop this pathology. Because our brains have all these pathways and all these thoughts, and guess what the human ego is trying to do? Drive you into hell. That's what it's trying to do. And all these thoughts, it's like you're walking through a maze. And if you start pursuing things like reasons to be anxious or reasons to be depressed, that's why this teaching, Paul says, to not worry about anything, right? Just pray. Don't worry about anything. It's a great strategy. What we're all doing, this little thing, what we're all doing is we're all on a journey. We're in a journey that's an exploration of the mind. And the observer, the real you, is actually having an experience which we need to focus on, otherwise we'll lose it. And the experience, which I call the birth, the death, the physical experience. You have a path that can go all over the place, but if you pick the pure, focused spiritual path, this blue line, call that the Tao, you'll have the most efficient, effective, peaceful experience. But if you cling to all the stuff, the labels about self and other, you're going to veer off the path. But when you truly know who you are, when you know you're an eternal being, eternal soul that cannot die, that has no gender or has no age or has no race or religious affiliation or political affiliation, none of that, you're detached, and in comes the Holy Spirit. And if you just detach a little, faith the size of a mustard seed can move a mountain, just detaching a little feels great, right? It's also a reward. That's the way the brain is set up this way. It's a reward because the body likes that feeling. And then you want to get it back. So you repeat. Hebb's law, practice makes perfect. Repeat again and again and again. If your eye is single, your whole body will be filled with light. And so what we have the opportunity to do, as the science is suggesting, we have the opportunity to recognize that you are the personal awareness. They call it a passenger sitting by just observing. If you shift the way you're observing, the movie's going to shift. I compare it to riding a roller coaster. You hop on a roller coaster. You didn't design the roller coaster. The roller coaster is going to go up and down and do loop-de-loops, and it's going to go the speed that the creator of the roller coaster set up. You, however, get to define your experience inside the car. If you're on a roller coaster, it's going up the hill. You could either go, no, this is scary, or you can raise your hands and go, wee, right? Human beings are on roller coasters. All the physical parts of self, including your thoughts, are a feature of a spiritual roller coaster. You are deciding whether or not you want to hide your eyes and be afraid, or raise your hands and go, wee, right? And that's freedom, that's liberation. In closing, Buddha says, strive for your own liberation with diligence, okay? Your own liberation is to detach from all these physical aspects of self. Your liberation is to recognize what your thoughts really are. Your liberation is to realize that your emotions are guiding you along this path. That's your liberation. And then to embrace all of them, right? When you embrace them and say, these are teaching me something. They're not me, but they're teaching me something. Like signs on the highway that say exit ramp right, up in a mile. You listen to that if you want to get to where you want to go. Listen to the emotions. Pay attention to these thoughts. Analyze them. But do it from the point of view of the observer, the passive awareness that's sitting there on the sidelines. And then you experience the ride much better. Raise your arms and go, wee, right?